This is the Too Tall Sports Podcast. Thank you for joining us again today. My guest is David Ostrowski. He just came out with a book called Pro Sports in 1993, a signature season in football, basketball, hockey, and baseball. It's a book covering the year 1993 and all the crazy sporting events that happened that year and all the championships and players that were involved in it. Of course, we talk about the Cowboys Super Bowl run. We talk about Jordan's Bulls and the dynasty then and leading up to the 94 season when Jordan left. We talk about that. We discuss the Toronto Blue Jays winning back-to-back World Series championships. We talk about the Buffalo Bills and everything in between with that. And Camden Yards in Baltimore, the new ballpark that kind of revolutionized the fan experience in the modern-day baseball world. So once again, David Ostrowski is my guest. He's the author of this book, Pro Sports in 1993. Just came out, so we talked to him all about that. Once again, you can always find the show at Too Tall Sports Podcast on Instagram, on Facebook. You can just type in Too Tall Sports Podcast. You'll find our group there. Also on Twitter, I'm pretty active there as well, at Too Tall Sports without the podcast. Just hit me up on social media. That'd be great. Love to hear your feedback. We got episodes dropping at least once a week normally, so glad to have you here and enjoy my episode with David today, and I'll see you on the other side. Welcome back to another edition of the Too Tall Sports Podcast. My next guest is the author of a new book called Pro Sports in 1993, a signature season in football, basketball, hockey, and baseball. He's originally from Boston and used to write for the Associated Press back in the mid-2000s, covering Boston sports. His name is David Ostrowski. What's up, David? How you doing?
I'm good, man. How you doing tonight?
I'm good. Thank you for being on the show. Coincidentally, there's a Rams Patriots game on, so I'm sorry to take you away from that.
No, it's quite all right. It's only fitting, though. We're even coast to coast here, you know?
That's right, L.A. and New England. But I appreciate you being on. Definitely want to talk about your book, but I want to kind of get your background a little bit just for our listeners to kind of know about you a little. Sure. So I wanted to kind of talk about your upbringing. You know, you grew up in the Boston area. What was it like? Boston sports hadn't really popped yet in a while. So what was it like for you growing up with Boston sports in the late 80s and early 90s?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the interesting thing, and it's kind of why I wrote this book. My fondest memories of sports from the early 90s, and I guess 93 in particular, really didn't have too much to do with Boston. The Patriots were horrible, right? They were like 1 in 15, when I was like in second or third grade, whatever it was. This was before Parcells and Bledsoe. Red Sox were not very good. This was several years now after the 86 and Buckner. They were like around a 500 team. Butch Hobson was the manager. Again, not a contender. The best team, the Celtics were really not very good either. This was post Larry Bird. Bruins would be lucky if they made it to the first or second round of the playoffs. So, in answer to your question, Brett, it really was not anything like what young people who grew up in Boston are accustomed to today. It was such a thrill when a Boston team made it to the playoffs. So, much, much easier to get tickets for sure. Foxborough Stadium was nothing like Gillette, And yeah, that's kind of why, I wrote this book. Was just a lot of my memories did not involve Boston sports. They involved the Troy Aikman and Emmett Smith-led Cowboys and the, Jordan's Bulls, obviously, Gretzky, So again, I think obviously I had strong memories of going to Fenway Park as a kid for sure. And the old Boston Garden, I got to see, Reggie Lewis when he, Dee Brown play. But like I said, in terms of TV and postseason games, a lot of it was around the country.
It's surprising because you know how prideful the Boston sports fans are. So I'm surprised that for someone that grew up in that area, you actually are willing to write a book about an era where Boston was basically irrelevant in sports. Yeah. So it's pretty crazy. So good for you to step out of that.
Thank you. Well, there's been so many books, books upon books over the past, 2 decades, right? It's like the high renaissance of Boston sports, 4 teams and whatever it has been 11 championships. So yeah, it was kind of refreshing to take a look back and when, Boston wasn't dominating the sports scene for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And as far as kind of as you grew up and you decided to go to college, we talked pre-show about you going to a school called Brandeis University, which I didn't really know much about. And for a big sports fan like yourself, I was just curious, what made you go there and not pick one of the big sports program type of schools?
Well, it's a great question. And I'll say two things. One is the reason I went there was because I got offered a scholarship. So that meant my parents decided I was going there. Yeah, that helped. And it was certainly not an athletic scholarship. But, when I was applying to colleges back in the early 2000s, it certainly was a factor, when I was thinking about, what a school like, as a big sports fan, obviously, like a Northwestern or Michigan or Wisconsin, I definitely thought about that. And I'll say when I visited a couple of good friends of mine at Wisconsin when I was a senior at Brandeis, not that they were winning championships left and right, the Badgers, but there was that atmosphere that you're sorely missing at a D3 school. And you obviously, have been a D1 athlete yourself, kind of know what I'm referring to. So,
Sure.
At a baseball game at Brandeis, of course, this is New England weather. It could be 45 degrees on a Saturday afternoon in early April. You're lucky if you have 20, 25 fans in attendance, maybe if some roommates, some girlfriends, some parents, whatever, basketball games on a Friday night, if they had if there was 1,000 fans in the stands, that would be big. So, yeah, I definitely thought about that a lot, when I was at school. I think when I was in high school, there was such a focus on getting into college and getting into the school you want, that maybe it wasn't such a thing then, but definitely when you're at college, absolutely,
Yeah, for sure. And then you decided, you told me you majored in history, but you had some journalism studies in there. What made you kind of transition into journalism where you really wanted to cover sports and be a writer?
That's a great question. So I would definitely say in '04, that summer, I interned for the local ABC News affiliate in Boston. And I had worked for the college newspaper. I had done some writing in high school. But I think being around the Red Sox in 2004, just as an intern, and I wasn't really doing anything that important, but I was, there. And just oh my God, you could do this for a living. Like you can get paid to go to these games and, rub shoulders with whoever. And, it was like, holy shit, this could be my job, like doing this potentially every day. And then I kind of went back to college that fall. I really got into more, I guess, on the electronic media. And this was when the Celtics were really bad. Like they were, irrelevant. It's not even funny, right? So we got to go to their practices because they practiced in Waltham. And this was for the radio station at college. And we actually got to talk to these guys. And then we'd ask questions and they would answer our questions. And it was like pretty fucking cool. You know what I mean? So,
this was like the Paul Pierce, Antoine Walker, that team? Okay.
Yeah. Tony Allen, Al Jefferson, Kendrick Perkins, Delonte West.
There you go.
Literally, there was the team, there were coaches, there were trainers, and there were maybe 2 or 3 other reporters there. So it was well, you college kids, as long as you don't ask for autographs or anything, it looks like we have more media here. So, and then it kind of just took off and I started doing, working for some of the local papers and, got credentials to cover some games. And I just became obsessed with it, quite frankly. And I just couldn't get enough of it. And I'd worked for Nesson the next summer as an intern. And then I decided to transition more to print, which I did. And then I started writing for, the AP, the Metro West Daily News, the Jewish Advocate, Patriots Game Day Weekly, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it was definitely though that summer of like, wow, you could work in sports and, yeah.
That's awesome, man. No, that's lucky you got to do that early on. And I was going to ask you about covering, sports. Basically since the Patriots won that first Super Bowl, early 2000s, the city of Boston really took off in winning. As you know, the last 20 years it's been title town. You guys win too much. Hopefully it's over now. But
Right.
I just was curious about, specifically the year 2004. Obviously, you wrote the book about 93. But 2004, the Red Sox win for the first time in forever, and the Patriots coming off a three-peat. What do you remember about 2004 as a Boston sports fan?
Oh, it was crazy, man. There was one weekend in October. Red Sox were in the World Series against St. Louis. Okay, so you had games 1 and 2. You had the head of the Charles Regatta, which for those of you who don't know, it's a huge event. Unfortunately, it was canceled this year because of the pandemic. But it's a huge thing, and that was going on that weekend. Patriots were playing the Jets, and the woman who turned out to be my wife actually invited me to the game. Patriots were 4-0. The Jets were 4-0. Patriots were on their way to their third Super Bowl in 4 years, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Of course, no one was really talking about the Patriots. Everyone was talking about the the Red Sox, and then BC was playing Notre Dame. So, I mean, it was crazy, man. In 04, Celtics not relevant at all. Bruins decent, but not, But yeah, the Red Sox that summer was, and summer before 03 was just unbelievable. With Theo and the new guys they brought in, and then certainly Ortiz came into his own, obviously, that year, and they got Schilling. It was pretty much the same team in 03 to 04. The difference was Schilling and Keith Falk they got. Just like I said, definitely that summer, getting around the team and being up close to guys that you only watch on TV, whether it was like Derek Lowe or Bill Miller, Kevin Millar, Bronson Arroyo. It was pretty unbelievable. And then, just again, like the excitement going back to campus in the fall and when they came back against the Yankees, and we all kind of know, what happened.
Right. Yeah.
The World Series was kind of like an afterthought. So it was incredible. And I'll tell you what, it was so much more something you could appreciate then than you do when the Red Sox won like their fourth title.
Right.
I think I kind of speak for everyone. There is kind of like a fatigue, to it.
Sure.
So.
I wanted to ask you, since you did get to cover the Celtics a little bit in the mid 2000s, of course, I got to get a Kobe story out of you. So you got to see a lot of stars come through there, and lucky for you got to watch these guys play. So what was it like when you did get to see the Lakers come in town? Obviously it's a huge rivalry, but especially about Kobe, what do you remember about covering him?
Yeah, I mean, just to preface kind of what you were saying, I was doing a story on Jordan Farmar for the Jewish Advocate at the time, because he, of course, is Jewish, and he was a rookie, or I think he was a rookie at the time with the Lakers. He had a pretty good career at UCLA, and
yeah,
he was backup point guard. I want to say the starting guard was Smush Parker, but anyways, so I was doing a story on him, and Celtics were really, really bad. Lakers won that night. Kobe just went off. He was phenomenal. He was on top of the world then, and so I was saying, like, after the game, I'd never seen this before, and I'm not saying I'd been around superstar athletes a lot, because I hadn't, but I'd been around some. Dirk Nowitzki, Vince Carter, Shaq, Dwayne Wade. It seemed like they were always around their teammates. Like they weren't, there was always a lot of attention around them, but they were just kind of one of the guys, so to speak. That was not the case with Kobe. You walk into the Lakers locker room, there's Lamar Odom, there's Luke Walton, there's whoever, Ronnie Turiaf. There's no Kobe, but there is a curtained off area, and we all know he's in there, and then the curtain unveils after like 10 minutes of reporters there, and it's like the Wizard of Oz kind of walks through in this suit, and God knows what's in his ear, and he answered questions, and he was very polite and gracious. The fans were chanting MVP, which is a pretty rare thing to see in Boston, and he acknowledged that. But yeah, I mean, just again, you'd never seen that before. An athlete just totally, quarantined, if you will, for lack of a better word. That's probably not the right word to use now, but from the rest of the locker room, and it's just kind of interesting.
It was interesting. That is a great story. When you watched, and we'll talk about Jordan a little bit with your book, but as far as The Last Dance goes, you could kind of see Jordan had similar type of bodyguards around, and it was, there's a little bit of similarities there where you're just at such an elite level. It's kind of, I hate to say allowed, but you're allowed to be a superstar and have that kind of protection.
Yeah, I mean, Jordan, I think, had a team of 6 bodyguards.
Right.
I mean, I don't know if Kobe was at that level, at Jordan's level, but, it was kind of similar, what I mean? Where, you had this guy who was now doing it on his own. Shaq had left. Of course, he had been in Miami now for a few years.
Right.
Kobe, like you said, was in his late 20s. And, I mean, for my money, he was the best player on the planet. Jordan Farmer said that, there's no doubt. This was LeBron was coming into his own. I don't think he was in his prime yet. He was still only 22, 23,
Yeah.
wasn't playing on a particularly good team. So, yeah, I just think Kobe, his talent was so otherworldly. And yeah, he was a massive, massive celebrity,
Yeah.
At a time when, the league, there weren't too many of them. There was kind of like a lull, you know what I mean? This was before Durant and Steph Curry, right? Yes, there was Tim Duncan, but he, of course, he plays in San Antonio, and, he's just more of a subdued personality, I guess. So There really weren't too many superstars. It was kind of a funny time in the league. So
yeah, definitely. No, that's great stuff. So let's get to your book. Once again, it's called Pro Sports in 1993, a signature season in football, basketball, hockey, and baseball, the four major sports. What made you, I know we kind of talked about this a little bit, but specifically 93, I mean, you could have picked any year to cover. What made you pick 93?
Yeah, and that's the question, Brett, that I've been trying to answer over and over again. I still don't have a really good answer. But I will start by saying, I've already given you the spiel about how Boston wasn't so hot then. So, the good old days for me as a sports fan were in 93. But I think if you look at it in context, you think the next year in 94, the team, baseball, it was horrible, right? There was the strike.
Yeah.
The season ends in the middle of August. There is no World Series for the first time since Teddy Roosevelt is a president. The players almost didn't even show up for the All-Star game in Pittsburgh in 94. It was that bad.
Yeah.
The biggest two stories in the sports world in 94 were O.J. Simpson and Nancy Kerrigan. And it was obviously very kind of, those were uncomfortable stories. So I think 93 was kind of like, the calm before the storm. And I guess it's one year where it coincided, several dynastic teams, the Cowboys, the return of America's team in Dallas, right? First time since Staubach, in the 70s that they won a championship.
Yeah.
I think it was the most impactful year in Michael Jordan's life between, winning a third title against, the rival in Charles Barkley and the Phoenix Suns, the gambling thing, his dad unfortunately dying, and then, of course, him leaving sports afterwards, or leaving basketball afterwards, excuse me. And, as it turns out in hockey, the Canadiens were the last Canadian-based team to win a title. That's something that stood the test of time. That's 27 years and ongoing.
Yeah.
It was pretty remarkable to think about. And then, one of the greatest World Series finishes ever with Joe Carter, hitting a walk-off home run, which was just remarkable. And then there's a couple other things too. I think I always say this with Joe Montana, it's like if anyone would ever write a sports book about 2020, and I don't know why you ever would, you'd have to kind of do something about Brady going to the Buccaneers. And I think, back in 93, that was a huge deal, Montana going to Kansas City, just because he hadn't played in 2 years, right? And he was Tom Brady before Tom Brady. He was the GOAT, right? And he had won 4 Super Bowl rings. And, he was trying to revive his career. And then it just so happens that 2 other major events, you have the greatest comeback ever in an NFL playoff game. The Bills are down by 32 points in the third quarter, missing their few star players, which we'll get into, and then come back and win. And then the All-Star game that year, it really showcases probably, the most important ballpark in the late 20th century in Camden Yards.
Yeah, for sure. And I was actually going to start with Montana, but before that, just in general, I know we wanted to talk about this for sure. What was it like for you, for someone, you were 9 years old in 93. So you had to get firsthand interviews of what actually happened then, because you couldn't have a real opinion on what really went on. So right. What was it like getting interviews, and what do you remember about the process of some of these guys that you had to track down?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. A lot of, the information in this, well, not a lot, almost all of it is not from memory, okay? It's from, not only interviews, but websites and, obviously articles and more articles and more articles and, video clips. So there's a lot of stuff there that it's not from memory. But the interviews, one trend that I found really quickly was just, I always got the best information from, and I may have told you this earlier, like a backup catcher, a third string quarterback, or, the fourth line right wing.
Sure, they had to do a lot of watching.
They had to do a lot of watching. And their interviews were raw, and they hadn't done, interviews in years and years and years. So you got some good sound bites from there, things that maybe were said behind the scenes that, a more prominent athlete would just be a little more tight-lipped, they wouldn't really go into. So, I think at first I really tried to get a lot of the hockey guys only because, there's, a pretty good roster size. And I think hockey guys are, more or less known for being, very friendly and outgoing and more down to earth perhaps than, some other sports or whatever.
Sure.
It's so happened that I had some luck there. So I don't know. I just I'm trying to think of like, I guess the big thing for me was kind of not being reliant on my memories and, really trying to just get as many primary sources as possible. I guess that's kind of how I'd phrase it.
You had a good story about the Steve Christie, the kicker from Buffalo. How was it? How was it like? That was your first big interview, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And Steve Christie was the kicker for Buffalo. He kicked the winning field goal in the comeback game, and of course was the place kicker for Buffalo for two of the four Super Bowls, Super Bowls 28 and 27 and 28. And it just so happened I emailed him. I started this book in very early 2017, so like January 3rd, because I think January 2nd was a holiday. So anyway, I emailed him on Tuesday morning at work, expecting I'll hear back, whatever. I didn't even I think I got his information on LinkedIn or something. I didn't even bring a recorder to work. I was like, I'm not going to hear back, till time.
Yeah,
So I
yeah.
don't have a recorder. I have a notebook. So I go down to grab a bite to eat for lunch, get an email back in my Gmail, a new email from him. Hey, here's my cell. I'm around this afternoon. Give me a call. Right. I'm like, oh shit. Like, all right. I don't have a recorder, but I don't want to leave this guy hanging. Like, he's kind of expecting my call. I should have just emailed back like, hey, let's talk tonight. Is this good? But I didn't want to be like difficult. I was just so thrilled he got back to me, And so I called him and I talked on my phone in the car, and I'm like scribbling down notes, and like he's giving me some good stories, and we're talking and stuff. And then like I don't have a recorder, so I'm like, I don't know if any of this is transcribing. So anyway, I finished up with him, look at my notes, I'm like, this is I have nothing to like go with here. Like I can't read anything. Like, and I'm like, oh, like I'm just like feeling really discouraged. And I can remember it like it's yesterday. And then I'm like, I don't know, like I can't do any more of these interviews. Like I'm not gonna I just can't forget this. You know what I mean? And make a long story short, I did about 50 more interviews, and then by the end of 2018, I emailed them and I said, hey Steve, there's some follow-up questions I have. Even though I didn't really have any more questions, we talked a couple of years ago, and he was very nice. He said, yeah, just give me a call, and then we kind of went over some of the same things. And I had the recorder this time, and I got it. So I only say that story just because it's so hard, or maybe it's not hard, but it's hard for me to shift gears from doing work, whatever you're doing. I don't work full time in sports journalism, but then to go talk about the Super Bowl, with Cowboys and Bills from 1993. You know what I mean? It's very different, and I think at times it definitely was hard for me to shift gears, for sure.
Sure. Let's get back to Joe Montana. So, of course, in April of '93, he was traded to Kansas City. So clearly, the Montana era is over. Steve Young comes in for the Niners, and they're really going to build around him. What do you remember about that story with Joe Montana going to Kansas City for the first time?
Well, I don't know about what it's been like with Tom in Tampa, and of course it's different with the pandemic. But I can tell you that with Montana going to Kansas City, fans were so crazy for him that one woman went up to him and brought the urn with her late husband's ashes and asked him to sign it.
Oh, wow.
People would camp out. There was a bar he liked to go to with a couple of the teammates, and they would literally try to find his empty beer cans that he would drink and stuff them in, their bags. It was pretty crazy. Kansas City, famous, football organization, right? But they hadn't been very good for the 70s. Well, the 80s, they really weren't good. Early 90s, Marty Schottenheimer comes in, and they were decent. They were getting better, but they hadn't really had a great quarterback. So he was kind of viewed as the savior. So, yeah, I think fans were just going absolutely nuts. They practiced in a town in Wisconsin, River Falls. In years past, they would have a couple hundred people there, maybe, in late July. The guys were telling me, I talked to a few of them, 5,000, 6,000 people, for him and Marcus Allen, in training camp in 93. So it was pretty crazy in terms of it's kind of like what you would expect if this were a regular season and Brady was going to Tampa.
Right.
Only different is I think, Kansas City was just a much more legendary franchise.
Yeah, but it's a quarterback of that caliber leaving. And I wanted to ask you about, you got to interview Herm Edwards, that's a big get, as they say in the industry, man. That's huge. So what did he have to say about Montana when he played with the Chiefs with Joe?
Yeah. Well, it was lucky. I just lucked out more than anything, really. If he was still working at ESPN, I never would have gotten hold of him. But he had signed on as the Arizona State head coach a few years ago. And so he was so nice. He was awesome. Like I just emailed his rep, and, he said, well, he's got over 100 interviews to do, but we'll definitely make this happen. I said, wow, like I'm nothing. Like, I can't believe you're going to do that. He's got interviews lined up at Sports Illustrated and Forbes and whatever. So, yeah, we did it a few months down the road, and he was really nice. And, he gave me the stories about, Montana and how, during training camp. But then he said to me, a lot of people don't know this, but he said, before the first game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, he passed the kidney stone the night before. I said, wow, please speak, please do tell. And, he was like, he was in the emergency room the night before, and then he came out and he had a great game that day. He threw like 3 touchdowns, classic Montana. And he hadn't really played since the late 90 season. And it was just like, wow, like, I don't know, like I couldn't imagine that,
No way.
Yeah. And he actually got injured that season opener. He didn't play that many games in the year. He played like 11 games, but he had a really good postseason. And then in the conference championship game, he did suffer a concussion against Buffalo, and Buffalo did go on to win. But, I think the overarching theme I got from talking to some of the teammates is he did not act like a prima donna, around them, for the most part. I mean, he went out with guys on steak dinners. He parked with the guys, his cars. Yes, he had, security around him and, obviously things like that. But, he did try to be like one of the guys. One story I'll tell you that was just kind of interesting. There's one player, I couldn't believe it. Like they were doing they were talking about I don't even remember the play. It was just a handoff running back over right tackle, like the simplest play. And this guy was like, I can't believe it. He was like in the training camp and he had his notebook out and his pencil sharp and he was taking notes on this play. And he's like, everyone was like kind of looking around like, what the hell? Like he was acting like a rookie, like an undrafted rookie. And here at Joe Montana, he's like taking all these notes. And I think it kind of just showed you like how he could lead by example. You know what I mean? He said like this was like the simplest play, whatever it was like just a handoff. And he was like taking notes on all the nuances. So, I don't know. It just kind of like set the tone,
Sure. No, that's great. No, that's good stuff. Obviously, that was a big deal when Montana left San Francisco. I wanted to shift to talking about Camden Yards. I know you prefaced it a little bit, but it was a stadium that, Baltimore had an old stadium before that, and it was kind of, I guess, according to what I read in your book, it's a little revolutionary. And you even had a quote from Peter Gammons, former Baseball Tonight ESPN guy, talking about how it kind of changed the fan experience. So what was the big story in '93 about Baltimore, the Orioles building Camden Yards?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting because, Camden Yards, a lot of ballparks have been built since then, right? In that same kind of, spirit of the retro throwback. And I think they have a lot more, bells and whistles than Camden Yards does in terms of, it's older now, right? But I think when you look at Camden Yards, it's like what it was compared to what was before it. And what was before it was not very good. You had these concrete donuts in Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, Cincinnati, San Diego, Atlanta, and it was just terrible. I mean, as a former pro baseball player, you can probably imagine a lot of these guys felt it was disrespectful to not only be sharing a turf with a football team, but just to be thrown in like this, like parking lot of a ballpark. It was just bad. And, when 92 was the first season Camden Yards opened, it did not open in 93, but this was before MLB Network, before, Cal Ripken and his streak. So the Orioles were not a prominent team in the postseason, again, pre-streak. So Camden Yards just did not get a lot of spotlight from the national, media. So 93, the All-Star game, that's when fans got to see it for the first time. And, and it's changed. There's, been some sprucing up certainly around the ballpark, but I do think that All-Star game in 93 was the first time people got to see, wow. And then, in the years ahead of time, you got, new ballparks in Texas and Cleveland. Those opened up pretty soon, and then there's been, 20 or so ballparks since then that don't just have uniform dimensions, right? There's some wood in there. There's some brick, it's not just, concrete. It's, so in terms of the fan experience, I don't know if you've ever been to Camden Yards or not.
Yeah, one time actually. My family and I did a ballpark trip, so we hit all the Northeast ballparks, and Camden was one of them. It was really hot, I remember that, but it was really cool being there. And I was going to ask you about, unless you had another story on that.
No, I would just say with the fan experience, just having it central to the city, where you out and it's like there. Three Rivers in Pittsburgh was like literally like 20 minutes from downtown.
Okay.
San Diego, where Jack Murphy was, nowhere near downtown. So having it in the city, I think, in terms of the fan experience, is huge.
And I was going to ask you about the home run derby during All-Star weekend or week, and the famous Griffey versus Juan Gonzalez showdown.
Yeah.
Griffey hit one off the warehouse in right field. So What did you uncover about that story?
Well, it's never been done. Obviously a righty could never do it.
Right.
It would have to be a lefty, which Griffey is. And apparently it's the only one. This is according to the folks there. It's never on the fly anyway. It's never been done.
Right.
I guess because of not that I can really speak to this very much, but the physics of the ballpark, the way it is with the aerodynamic situation there. Again, I'm not trying to be an expert on that at all, but the wind tunnel makes it very hard for a ball to go that far. He hit it square, off there's a mark right there where it is, right off the warehouse. It didn't break glass. I don't know, what people thought, that, but that didn't happen. I think there's been, I can't remember the exact number. I want to say 90 something balls that have plopped down on Utah Street. Utah Street, EUTAW, is right behind right field, that massive, wall there, right? So it's quite a poke to get it onto that street where all the fans can walk. It's an open promenade. But to get one off the wall, it's only been done once.
They measured it at, I think I saw in your book, 465 feet. That is a shot. Yeah.
A shot. Yeah, it's a shot. And maybe it's because a lot of the sluggers, I don't know, like the McGuires and, Sosa's, they're righties and didn't play there much. Perhaps, it would have been done there. But anyway, you mentioned Gonzalez, and he ended up winning the thing. Griffey didn't even win the Derby.
Of course, yeah. Sometimes that happens where the guy that actually puts on the best performance doesn't actually win just based on numbers and has tires out or something like that. So that is pretty crazy, though. But that was a huge memory from Camden Yards.
Yeah, and I think it's funny you mentioned that the 99 home run derby, I believe McGuire put on a show. I know he put on a show, but I'm pretty sure he didn't win. I think Griffey actually won, if I'm not mistaken.
That was at Fenway, right?
That was at Fenway, yeah.
Yeah. That was the big one where Ted Williams was there. And so that was a huge all-star game with tons of Hall of Famers there. I remember that was awesome.
Yeah, they celebrated, I think, the 50 greatest living players.
Yeah. That was awesome. I wanted to, now we get to talk about the Chicago Bulls, which is, of course, a great topic. And I know you told me you watched The Last Dance, and I was going to ask you if you saw some things in there that, I mean, this is a huge, huge topic and huge part of your book. It's 93. The Bulls are coming off a three-peat. You got to interview Bill Cartwright, among others. Like, what was the whole experience about uncovering the story of Michael Jordan and the Bulls?
Well, it's interesting because I think there's been literally 1,000+ books written about Michael Jordan, right? So, am I uncovering anything new? Maybe not. But what I tried to do was kind of by focusing on one season and starting with the Dream Team, which was, of course, the beginning of the 92-93 season, really tried to look at the trials and tribulations that went on with this first time that, two guys, Jordan and Pippen, were doing this 11-month commitment to basketball. So, they had been playing, against the Portland Trailblazers in the finals in June. A few weeks after that, they're in San Diego, UC San Diego training. And they're in Spain, they're in the Olympics, right? And then they come home, and a few weeks later, training camp starts. So, this idea of Phil Jackson and how he's managing these two guys, with the rest of the team, with an aging, team for the most part. Horace Grant's kind of getting up there. Certainly Bill Cartwright is, John Paxson. There's some older guys, Trent Tucker. In their head, one thing I tried to really address in the book is certainly there had been some serious friction between Jordan and some of his teammates in a not so distant past. Namely with, Will Perdue and Horace Grant, Bill Cartwright. They had a few guys there I mentioned who really did not want to be part of, that team because of Michael Jordan. They requested trades. And I think it's only important to point that out, that there was some significant friction, mainly because the book, The Jordan Rules, had come out and exposed that. That's really where I got a lot of that information. But as the season went on, I think the interesting thing is, probably the most interesting thing is that when the gambling scandal came out, during the conference finals against the Knicks, he went to Atlantic City, hours literally before game 2.
Yeah.
With his father, and, he didn't get back until the early morning. No one on the team had an issue with it. No, at least not publicly. Jackson didn't, but the media, made it a huge deal, right? And the players basically, boycotted talking to the media. So I thought it was really interesting that they stood by Jordan, when this happened, even though a lot of them really couldn't stand him. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And, it was just I think the other thing that I got from the season was not that it was boring ever, but I think it was kind of like, this again, here we go, like another, like run at this thing. They're getting older. And then, the opposition, their number 3 was tough. It was against Barkley and the Suns. Barkley's the MVP. The Suns have a much better point guard to Chicago's, Kevin Johnson, much better player than BJ Armstrong.
Right.
The first title against the Lakers was kind of like, a formality. I'm sorry.
No, it's true. Magic was, they were done. No more Kareem. That era was done.
James Worthy was old. Obviously, Magic was old. They'd gotten past Detroit in the conference finals, which they hadn't been able to do in a long time. So that was kind of like the big,
Right. That was the hump they had to clear to get to the Lakers. Yeah.
I don't think Jordan really gave two craps ever about, Clyde Drexler the next year. Yes, they went to 6 games, but it wasn't really that competitive.
No.
I think their average margin of victory, I want to say, was 15 points. But,
right.
Like I said, this third title was tough. And, the Suns, the Bulls won the first 2 games in Phoenix. The Suns, came back in game 3 to win a tremendous triple overtime game. And, there was just a lot. At this point, I think in Jordan's life, he was by far the most dominant, not only the most dominant player in his sport, but the most popular athlete, in the world. The Dream Team certainly made him that if he hadn't been already. And not only athlete, but just one of the most high-profile celebrities in America for sure. So it was draining on him. He felt like, not that anyone's feeling sorry for him, but, kind of like a prisoner of his hotel room. He really couldn't go out anywhere at all, which is why I think he wanted to do the gambling thing, the Atlantic City. It was just like to get out of his Plaza suite, in Manhattan. He couldn't go anywhere in New York. So that was kind of his way to escape. And then, obviously what happened afterwards, everyone knows with his father and then leaving basketball.
Yeah, and you could see it in The Last Dance. He was like, he handled it well, but you could tell. He even admitted, he's like, I'm getting tired of this life. Everyone's taking shots at him now. It's just, he liked to gamble, he liked to smoke cigars and drink and whatever. But if he shows up and drops 40, who cares? But it was only sustainable for so long, and he probably did gas out, and he went to baseball and that whole thing. But that is interesting. You're right about that year. That was the culmination of a three-peat there. So that's pretty awesome. I did want to ask you about, speaking of the Dream Team, actually right before that, I wanted to ask you about Bill Cartwright. What was it like interviewing him?
Bill's a soft-spoken man. He's a nice man. He's working at USF, University of San Francisco, where he went. I kind of joke he's the most famous big man to come there, not named Bill Russell, right? Because Bill Russell was, of course, legendary Celtics player. Bill's a smart guy. He went on to coach in the NBA afterwards. He coached the assistant for the Bulls and then the head coach for the Sonics. He didn't, he was good. He didn't really, I asked him a little bit about had Jordan, improved as a teammate. He didn't really answer the question.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Just like said, well, compared to, he kind of went off with Doug Collins, his approach to Jordan and Phil Jackson. So I wouldn't say I got anything. He mentioned, like, one thing, like the Bulls lost game 5 of the finals in 93 at home. They were hoping to, clinch on their home floor, right? And then he said they were about to fly back to Phoenix, and on the plane, Jordan comes in with a cigar and he says, hello, world champs. You know what I mean? And, just kind of that like confidence, like love him or hate him, just knowing he was there, that confidence, he could exude. So yeah, no, he was a good interview. And like I said, he's an interesting guy, for sure. I think he's into like transistor radios, he's kind of like old school like that. You know what I mean? He's bookish, very, very smart guy. And yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about the Dream Team for a second, and specifically Penny Hardaway. So I was happy you told me about this. You got to actually interview Penny Hardaway a couple years ago, once he took the Memphis job, I believe. Yeah. But I wanted to ask you about what you learned about Penny, and then 92 Dream Team, he was, one of the, I guess he was doing exhibitions and playing against the Dream Team. And that's how Shaq saw him. So what did you learn about Penny in the 92, 93 seasons?
Yeah. So one of the things, just to give this story, in summer 92, they did, the Dream Team practiced in UC San Diego. So who do they scrimmage against? Well, some of the best college players in the country. So Jamal Mashburn, Juan Howard, Chris Webber, Penny Hardaway, Jim Jackson, and whoever else. And I want to say Chuck Daly, who was the head coach, he's no longer around, but he was the head coach of the Dream Team. He kind of did something with the minutes of the clock. And I don't remember the exact details, but he had it so the college kids won that exhibition or something like that. He kind of like just kind of light a fire under their asses, right? And, obviously it was kind of not really like, it was kind of concocted that way. But the point was, it was kind of a nice little tune-up for the college kids. And these were all kids that were getting heavily recruited. They were in awe of, not just Jordan, but, Patrick Ewing, Bird and Magic were at the end, but David Robinson, Karl Malone, Chris Small, and so on and so forth. But I think two things that struck me that was interesting about Penny. One is I asked him, I said, look, you were a rookie in 93, 94. He finished up in Memphis in 92, 93. I was like, what's it like entering the league without Michael Jordan there? Is it more wide open? And I don't know whether he was being honest or not, but, he said, it wasn't like on my mind. It wasn't like something I was thinking about. You know what I mean? It just like wasn't, and then he said, I said, well, what's the difference? You left in 07 and you came into the league in 93. What's the big difference? He said, the league was getting so much younger in 07. The marquee names in 92, 93, 94 were all, like the Robinsons, Malones, Ewings, Barkley, Jordan, obviously. Whereas in 07, it was young kids, so, that was kind of interesting. I really thought of it like that. I wish I had asked him about Horace Grant because he had played with him for a number of years in Orlando. That would have been interesting, but I didn't. And even I didn't get into Shaq at all. It wasn't a very long interview just because with high-profile people, they generally aren't very long interviews. He was very nice, very, very nice guy.
Sure, that's good to hear. I think it was something. That's how Shaq kind of saw him, and they found a way for Orlando, like, hey, we got to get this kid. So Shaq kind of pushed for Penny, which was cool, and then they became a nice little squad there.
He was drafted first by Golden State, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, and then they traded for Chris Webber, right?
Yep, that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, let's go on to. I'm not a big hockey guy, but I don't think you said you are either. But 1993, the Montreal Canadiens beat the LA Kings in the Stanley Cup Finals. This is the last of record Canadian Stanley Cup. So, what did you uncover about the Montreal Canadiens run in '93 to the Stanley Cup?
Well, I think just the numbers, they won 10 straight overtime games, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. That means you got to go a perfect 10 for 10, in sudden death.
Crazy.
Pretty crazy. Patrick Waugh, spelled R-O-Y, but pronounced Waugh.
Right.
Was perfect in overtimes. He got off to a bumpy start, in the playoffs, but, to go 10 for 10 is pretty something. I don't know. They weren't the best team on paper. I think the Maple Leafs and the Kings, the two Titans out west, or the Campbell finals, they called them, and it wasn't the Western Conference finals, but whatever. I think they, on paper had more talent, but, Montreal had the hot goalie. And of course, as we all know, that makes a huge difference. They had a lot of depth to the team. And I guess, the interesting thing about that Canadiens team is just, afterwards, you had all these teams come in from like Tampa, Anaheim, Dallas, Carolina, Phoenix, and they won championships. And, and it's like, what the heck? And then, the teams like the Quebec Nordiques are no longer. The Montreal Canadiens haven't won in obviously a long time, nor have the, neither of the.
You got Edmonton, Calgary, you got Toronto. Exactly. It's like, damn, are one of these guys going to win the thing? Winnipeg.
Winnipeg, there you go. Right? So I just think that's kind of interesting. The league has expanded, it's moved, it's shifted teams, and you get all these teal and glossy uniforms and purple and silver, but it's just kind of interesting the way that's worked out. The country that gave birth to the game has been shut out.
It's crazy.
And the other part of that season was Gretzky coming back. Gretzky was a lot younger than Montana. Joe Montana was 37 when he revived his career. Then Gretzky was out for part of this season, half the year. He was only 31, and he was thinking of retiring. He was going through some excruciating back injuries. But I mentioned Montana only because his return to the game was really met with a lot of fanfare for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to stay in Canada, actually, for a team that did win. They won back-to-back World Series, the Toronto Blue Jays. I wanted to ask you about the, of course, the Joe Carter walk-off in '93 to win it all. That team was loaded, though. They had, John Olerud, Roberto Alomar, who we can talk about in a little bit, and Paul Molitor. And I didn't even realize, I was obviously pretty young, so were you, but Paul Molitor had a serious drug addiction I had no idea about, and I saw it in your book. He really turned it around, though. He had an amazing season. I mean, that team was loaded. What did you learn about the Toronto Blue Jays in the 93 World Series run?
Yeah, I mean, two things. One, I mean, for very different reasons, Paul Molitor and John Olerud almost died as very young men. Paul Molitor was one of the most widely respected living Hall of Famers. You talk about, you can appreciate this as a former pro ball player, all the injuries he went through, right? Torn rib cage muscle, all the broken bones, the hamstrings, missed, so many games, and, had finished with well over 3,000 hits. If he hadn't had all those
that guy could hit, man.
Yeah, maybe over 4,000 hits. But yeah, in 1980, he almost died of a cocaine overdose. It's something he'd been battling for a long time, and then, apparently got cleaned up. And then John Olerud, for a very different reason, when he was an undergrad at Washington State, he was, Baseball America Player of the Year and all that. He pitched as well as hit. He had an aneurysm, and he almost died too. So, that's where the helmet comes in. That's why the ubiquitous helmet at first base. So I think those are two of the really interesting stories from that team, definitely. They had a very geographically diverse team. They had guys from England, Haiti, Jamaica, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Montana, all different reaches of the globe, right? And then the lineup, the top five for sure. Devon White, Robbie Alomar, Paul Molitor, Joe Carter, and John Olerud, and everything clicked. And, I just think they kind of had a dynasty in the making, but for whatever reason, things didn't work out and they went downhill pretty quickly. And then just the end of that World Series, obviously, being just so dramatic. And then the matchup of teams, the Philadelphia Phillies came out of nowhere in 93. They were really bad in like 91 and 92. No one, Mickey Morandini, the second baseman, told me, everyone was writing us off. All the publications, had us, pinned for last place or whatever. And, they beat the heavily favored Braves in the NLCS, and they fell a little short in the World Series.
It's crazy that the Braves only won World Series, by the way, during that run.
14 pennants, and I think one thing that's overlooked just a little bit is Maddox really struggled in the postseason, especially early in his career. He certainly struggled in this NLCS. 92, he had some issues. So, as great a pitcher as he was, that was part of the, during big games, he wasn't quite as reliable as maybe some other guys were.
Yeah. And, speaking of Roberto Alomar, you had told me that you're working on a book about him, a biography. So what inspired you? I know he was on this World Series Blue Jays team. What inspired you to start working on that project for Roberto Alomar?
Well, I think when you write a book like this, and there's obviously a lot of different characters, right? Sometimes you want to be able to write more about so-and-so, right? And he was one of the guys. Not only was he just, the play speaks for itself in terms of just being really a five-tool star. As a kid, he was one of the guys I just really admired, idolized, just phenomenal, talent at second base. But he's an interesting guy. And we all know about, if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably familiar with the story with him and John Hirschbeck, when they had a fight back in, 96, and he spat at him and the whole thing. And, he brought Hirschbeck's deceased son into it, and it got pretty ugly. But what's interesting is in the years ahead, they've kind of made amends, and they've become actually pretty decent friends, not close friends, but they talk every now and then. And I thought that was interesting. But there are parts of his story that are a little dark for sure. A decade ago, there were allegations from multiple women that he did insist on having unprotected sex with them and spreading HIV. I did, have uncovered some less than flattering stories from former teammates of his about how he was as a teammate. I've learned, that he and Omar Vizquel did not have a particularly good relationship.
I didn't know that, because they were awesome in the Cleveland Indians, man. They had a chance to win a World Series in Cleveland a couple times. They were loaded. And that middle infield, you could argue, is the best middle infield of all time.
Well, I wouldn't say this if I didn't get, multiple sources telling me this, but, Alomar did have a chance to be on Sports Illustrated wanted to do a cover shoot with them, and Alomar refused to do it. He just did not want to be with Omar. He thought Vizquel kind of liked to party too much. Things kind of came too easy for him. He didn't think he was taking the game as seriously as he would have liked. And I think, Omar had been there for many years in Cleveland for sure. And Robbie hadn't. He just came over in 99. He was new. And the fans, they liked Alomar, of course, but I don't think they ever had that affection that they did.
Kind of like an A-Rod to Jeter situation.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
So I do think there was some, tension there. And it's not like they were enemies, but, one writer said to me, well, they weren't ever like hanging out really, they weren't going out to dinner, things like that.
Okay.
And, look, again, no one's perfect, and there's a lot of nice things he's done for sure off the field, but, he's like kind of everyone, right? He's complicated. Did a lot of stuff, has continued to do a tremendous amount of work in Puerto Rico, after Hurricane Maria. But yeah, there's some interesting stories there that I'm uncovering, and, it's been a blast to talk to former ball players, teammates, opponents, coaches, managers,
Yeah, that'll be awesome. I'll have to have you on again when that book comes out. Just curious, when do you think that's going to be ready?
So my hope is to have the manuscript done by March/April 2022.
Wow.
Yeah, it takes a while, man. It takes a while. I started this back in May. So it's taken 2 years to write it, to, proof it, to research all the notes and everything. So when it will be out, I don't know, maybe a couple of years from now, maybe.
Okay.
I've been fortunate. I've been able to get a lot of interviews. I've done about maybe 20 or so, which is a decent number, and some good ones too. Some interesting ones. And
Sure.
I think kind of done in the same spirit as this book, where I've really tried to do out of the box type things.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, we couldn't leave 1993 without talking about the Dallas Cowboys. So, of course, they won the Super Bowl that year, after they made the big trade a year or two prior, I think, for Herschel Walker, and they did all those picks, and it turned into Troy Aikman, Emmitt Smith, Michael Irvin, et cetera. What'd you learn about the Cowboys in 93?
Well, I think, like you said, Herschel Walker, the team was, in 89, they were horrendous. They were 1-15. They traded their best player, or certainly their best offensive player, Herschel Walker. And this was done, of course, by Jimmy Johnson, who was the new coach at the time, took over for Tom Landry. And, it was a very quick ascent. They go from 1-15 to 7-9, then 11-5, and then here they are, 13-3, and then, beating the Bills by 35 points in the Super Bowl.
Right.
So the team is, I guess the two things is, one, going into the Super Bowl 27, this is January 93. They were not expected to be there at this point. They were certainly not expected to beat the Bills, and it really pissed guys off. It really was good bulletin board material, So that was kind of interesting, just the fact that they really were expected to get their, asses kicked, and it was the exact opposite. It was an incredibly lopsided game. And then within that game, I think the most interesting story with the Cowboys is that of Ken Norton Jr., the linebacker. He, of course, is now coaching in Seattle. His father, the late, great Ken Norton Sr., the boxer, they had gotten into a really intense argument a year before when he got married. And they were very close throughout, his life playing, football in L.A. and then going to UCLA. And then, his dad did not like that he married a white woman. And he would not go to the wedding. They had this, really just really bad argument. Anyways, he stopped going to his games in the 92 season. He was at all the Cowboys games before. And the 92 Super Bowl, of course, was in Pasadena at the Rose Bowl, and he didn't go. So, it was just so interesting because he happened to have a great game that day. Ken Norton Jr. did, with Dallas had 9 turnovers. He, I think, had 2 of them accounted for. So that was just really interesting. And then, the next year they win. They go 12-4. They beat the Bills again in the Super Bowl. I think probably the most interesting thing then is just like, it's crazy. Like with Emmitt Smith, he had to, scratch and claw to get a new contract. It was like $12 million for I want to say 3 years or something, which now would be, I don't know, nothing,
Yeah.
Back then it was like, oh my God, this unbelievable
Right.
contract that Jerry Jones was so hesitant to give him. And I think it's just interesting, like how, yes, this is 27 years ago, but it's not that long ago, where contracts have changed so much.
Right.
And he held out the first 2 games in 93, actually. And they
That's
got
right.
Up. Yeah.
And then they had to cave and bring him in because they needed him.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was some tension there because, Jerry Jones was speaking openly about giving Troy Aikman, the white, sandy-haired golden boy kid, a contract extension.
Yeah.
But it seemed like he was so resistant with Emmitt. There was some, racial undertones, I think, going on for sure.
Yeah, there could be. Anything else from 93 that you wanted to mention? I think we covered a lot of the stuff in your book, but anything else that sticks out to you from there or from your book that we didn't talk about?
No, I think we covered, like I said, the Bills had that amazing comeback. They were down by 32 points early in the third quarter, wild card weekend. It was January 3rd, 93. They're missing, Jim Kelly, Thurman Thomas, one of their best linebackers. They come back and score 5 touchdowns by the beginning of the fourth quarter. It happened ridiculously quickly. So that was, something that I thought was worth chronicling. And no, like I said, every year is, important, right? Every year has its fair share of memories. I just really thought this year in particular, had some fun and inspirational and interesting stories.
Sure. I wanted to ask you, I'll say the name of the book again, just for everybody to check it out. It's Pro Sports in 1993, a signature season in football, basketball, hockey, and baseball. Where can everybody find it? And, follow you or follow the stuff you've been doing, and so we can support you and get the book.
I appreciate that, man. So certainly on Amazon, as you can probably imagine. It's definitely available on Amazon, both as a paperback and Kindle. My publisher, McFarland, it's also available, and they do run some discounts. They might be still doing those for the holiday season. I know they were doing some before for Black Friday, but those might still be up. And, barnesandnoble.com. It's not so much in bookstores, but it certainly in libraries and universities. It is, often available. So yeah, I think through those platforms. And then, on Twitter, I'm trying to get into. I'm Ostrowsky author, OSTROWSKY, just because I don't have the easiest name to spell or pronounce. And there's a Facebook page up. So yeah, any support, much appreciated. Any reviews, any likes, mentions, shares, whatever. That would be great, because it's a blast writing a book, but you want some, definitely try to build an audience, and it's not easy. The sports book market, it's very competitive for sure.
What's your Twitter again? Sorry.
Yep. At Ostrowsky author.
Got it. Okay. As soon as this comes out, I'll definitely put some stuff in the show notes on the episode, and then I'll, on social media, I'll put some stuff out there. And if you have any links, I'll definitely take those and put them out there so we can help you get some traction on this book. But I think it's great. There's a lot of good nuggets in there, especially for if you're a historian of sports, like if you're a student of the game and you love this stuff and you remember those eras, man, it's cool. So I appreciate you writing a book, and I learned some stuff as well. So I appreciate that.
My pleasure. And I just want to say, speaking of a guy who played, pro ball for a long time, it never gets old talking to people like yourself. And, I think for any guy who's ever strapped on a, glove and batting gloves and a bat, this game is so hard. It's just such a hard game, right? Like, I don't want to get into my playing career because it's not very interesting. But, I will say that I think it really just drives me crazy when people don't realize, like, every guy who's ever spent one day on a major league roster represents tens of thousands of boys whose dreams it is to play Major League Baseball. And I just don't think people realize how freaking hard this game is of baseball. I can't really speak to football, hockey. I never really played those sports. But, talking to these baseball players, I don't care if it's someone who, got a cup of coffee in 93, for 2 weeks. It's just, I don't know. I'm still in awe of, you think of the millions of kids who play this game. And you know this better than I do, but I just want to throw that out there.
Thank you, man. No, it's definitely a hard game. And I often say, and I'm sure you heard the line before, it's a game of failure. So you have to handle so much adversity. And how do you come back from that? How do you handle success when you start playing well? And, are you going to get complacent or whatever? And the game it'll humble you really quickly if you lose sight of your goals. And yeah, it's a long road to make it in baseball, much harder than any other sport, in my opinion, once you get drafted. It's football, it's practice squad, you're in the NFL. Basketball, it's really the G League, or you're in the NFL. Baseball, the minor leagues are meant to weed people out. So it's definitely a long road. So.
Well, I find your story very interesting too. And, it's, yeah, again, I'm just like, having played a little varsity high school baseball, I can, only appreciate or try to appreciate, what you've accomplished in the game. So it's an honor to really speak to someone with your, background.
Wow, I'm nobody. Thank you very much. No, I'm just kidding. I had a decent career, never made it to the big leagues, but no, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's David Ostrowski. He's got the new book, Pro Sports in 1993. Please check it out. I'll put all the links in the show notes when we drop the episode soon. And thanks again, David. It was great having you on.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
For sure. My thanks to David Ostrowski. Hope you guys go find that book. I'll post the links on my social media and also in the show notes. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts or on YouTube, Spotify, you'll be able to see the links there. You can always follow me, and I'll be able to share that as well. Once again, the book is called Pro Sports in 1993, a signature season in baseball, hockey, football, and basketball. Please go check it out. And my thanks again to David Ostrowski. You can always follow me at Too Tall Sports Podcast on Instagram. On Twitter, it's at Too Tall Sports. You can find me on Facebook. I'm there too. Just type in Too Tall Sports Podcast. If you would like to watch the show, again, it's on YouTube, Too Tall Sports Podcast. Thank you very much. Enjoy this holiday season, and I will see you guys very soon for another episode. Take it easy.